Ever since Exo-Force came out, LEGO has been in love with mechs. But all the ones I've seen seem to be piloted by a minifigure. With this build, I want to branch out and put down some roots by having a tree pilot our mech. So today, let's design a custom tree piloted mech. Let's start things off by building our tree pilot. I want to use this printed shell from a Chewbacca set. I like how the furred details here can also double as a tree bark texture. We can combine it with a Star Wars shin part for a nice shape to our tree. Let's build up the structure, starting with this socket and a friction add-on. Then, we can add a jog into our assembly with a pair of lift arms into a long axle. Onto that, let's add some ball joints, and then get the angle set for our branch with this Technic connector and an axle, which we can add a ball joint and some connectors to. Now, let's clip in our tree's bark. I'll fill in these ugly holes by adding some robot hands, and then clipping in this musket for some more bark details. For the next big branch, we can use this Paraka shin part, which we can add a number of connectors and pins to. All that will allow for this assembly to attach in to the rest of our tree. I'll further tie it in with this little assembly I'll cap off with a chocolate frog. After, I'll add some connection points with this bar, rod end, and a robot arm. For some detail, we can add a scythe blade to a rod end and a bar, and then swing the scythe into place. Let's try it the other way around. Much better. I want a little dead lower branch for our tree, so let's build one up with a pneumatic fitting we can clip a robot arm to. Then, we can cast an Expelliarmus on Hermione here, and use this wand as a dead branch. Another robot arm and some more twig details can round out this sub-assembly, and we can attach it into place. One of the things I want to show here is that the tree is symbiotic with the mech it pilots. To show the power flowing from the tree to the mech, we can use this tube. Let's add a bar plate here, and some Technic can connect into the other side. Then, we can attach it into the tree and have it wrap around the trunk. Next, I'll add a cable and a root in the form of these zip lines and follow the tube around. Then, let's connect in the other ends. Before we add in the rest of the branches, I'll give them a place to connect by adding these Technic bits. Then, let's build up the branches with a combination of robot arms, rod ends, and other branch-looking parts. After, we can finish off the tree with a number of these foliage parts that I've built up. And with that, our tree is finished. But if we're gonna have a tree pilot, we'll need a nice spot for it to be growing. So to build that up, let's start with this large dish and continue by adding a ball joint. Then we can build up the walls of this sci-fi pot using some of these gear rings. We can connect them together with some stopper axles. Then let's add a number of half pins for some rivet details. After, we can hold the dish in place with 4 pneumatic fittings. Next, I want to build up the turret head for our mech. For the main cannon, let's build some Technic structure to connect in some gray details for the cannon. Then, I'll use this large Star Wars blaster to continue the cannon. I'll add a hexagon to further armor it up. Next, we need to find a way to attach in a pair of Toa feet. Let's add in some Technic pins, as well as some connectors. With all that in place, I'll use some axles to attach the feet turned armor blades. Next, we'll need to add in some structure to continue the 2 sections that we have so far. First, we can do some minor surgery, and then let's add in some axle connectors and lift arms. We can reassemble the cannon and attach in our sci-fi tree pot. To further armor this up, I want to incorporate this angled snap part. To connect it in, we can use some funky snap connectors from the time LEGO tried to make a Connects knockoff. To that, I'll add some pin axles and connectors. Now, we can wrestle that into place and attach it in. To add some more structure, I'll build up this beam with some pins and Technic goodies. Next, let's connect that in before adding a few more connectors so that we can attach in this ratchet joint so the turret can pivot. One more connecting assembly is this socket, which we'll add some pin axles to. Then I'll lock it all together with the second beam assembly. For the shoulder joints, I'll add in some sockets, then a few root details to round out the turret design. After that, it's time to move on to the legs. But first, as many of you know, the burnt hot dog is my favorite part, but it definitely doesn't represent what I like to eat in real life. And that's where Factor, the sponsor of today's video, comes in. With Factor, I can keep the burnt hot dogs isolated to my builds and enjoy Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals. Every fresh, never frozen meal is chef created, dietitian approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. And you get to choose from a weekly menu of 35 options, including popular options like Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, or Vegan and Veggie. When I'm deep into a build, Factor meals eliminate the hassle of me prepping, cooking, or cleaning up. All I have to do is heat and savor the good stuff. Factor is a go-to lunch or dinner solution when I'm working on a custom creation. Also, you can discover more than 60 add-ons every week, like breakfast, on-the-go lunch, snacks, and beverages to help stay fueled and feel good all day long. What are you waiting for? Get started today and fuel up for your summertime goals. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code Mitch-Builds50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month's orders. That's code Mitch-Builds50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month of orders. Thanks to Factor for making videos like this possible. Now let's get back to building some mech feet. Here, I have a Knight's Kingdom shield, which I want to use for the main foot structure. We can augment it with some hexagon add-ons. For the toes, we just have to figure out a way to attach them. First, I'll add a plate to the shield, then some bar plates, and a socket for the ankle joint. A few more plates, and a tile can cap off this sub-assembly. Next, for the toes, I'll add a robot arm and a round plate to the hexagon before attaching a cheese slope for a little more detail. After, we can clip these into the bar plates on the foot and swing them into place. I want to add a little friction to the underside of the foot to help our mech stand better, and for that, I'll just connect in this rubber lift arm. With that, we can move on to building up some shins. To start them, I'll use this old Robo Rider torso part, which we can add a Technic connector to. Then for the knee, I'll add a ball joint and an axle. The only problem being that it spins freely. To lock its rotation in place, let's add some lift arms and another axle. Next, I'll add in a few more Technic bits. And we can finally add a small ball joint for the ankle. To the knee, I'll clip a Hero Factory bone and armor it with a rubber doodah. Afterwards, we can move on to the thighs, which I want to have armored with this large canopy part. For the structure of them, I'll start with a socket and then use some ball joints as spacers, so that I can add these large panel parts and another axle for another socket. Then we can lock it together with another panel and then add a friction extender for the hip joint. Our canopy should fit nicely here. I'll connect it in with a T-bar and some droid arms. After, we can add a clip and then some hollow studs in order to attach another hexagon. Let's connect our two leg halves together. Then we can snap in the foot. Let's further detail this assembly with some corrugated tubes. We can add in some Technic connectors for the top of the tubes to connect in. And with that, the leg is done, and I want to figure out some way for us to keep our pilot watered. The first thing we need is a water tank. For that, I'm turning to this jar of worms, which I forgot to add to my Rakshi build. But we don't need them here. What we need is the jar itself. For the water, I have a ton of these snowflakes, which should melt if it's hot enough out there. I think they look the part as water. Let's spruce up our water tank with some rubber treads. Then, I'll add some plates to the top of the container to attach in some pipe details. But they need some more pipes to attach to, so I'll connect some rods to a staff hilt, and then attach that under the treads. Finally, I'll add a pair of clips to connect this into the turret later. For the turret itself, I'll add in this little assembly, which we'll be able to use to attach our water tank. Now that we have a way to keep our tree hydrated, we need a way for it to defend itself. For that, I want to build up a rocket launcher. We can start off with this weird Technic part, which is meant to be used as a way to hang Lego pictures on a nail. Let's add some pins to attach two together. Then, I'll clip in some half pins. Finally, we can add some round tiles for the rocket covers. To later attach this in, I'll add some Technic connectors, and then an axle can secure this ball on a beam. One last touch I want to add is a Bionicle disc launcher for some added detail, and as a shout out to the BioCup logo, which is the competition I'm building this model for. I'll pin that in place, and then add a bit more structure to connect another hexagon. That finishes off our missile launcher, and we can move on to constructing the torso of our mech. The first thing I'll build up here is a neck joint, using these ratcheting joints and a pair of lift arms. For the main structure, I'll start off with this fancy beam, which I'll add some pins to, and connect a lift arm. Then, I'll add some Technic axles and a connector, before mirroring that assembly over to the other side. I'll build up a hip joint by adding a ball to this axle, and then adding a few more Technic connectors and a disgusting red pin before hiding it away forever with a mirrored assembly. After that, I want to add a few panel parts. I'll connect them with some pins so that they lock in place. We can do the same thing for the other side. Next, let's add some headlights, and for that, we can use a familiar part with this Technic hanger. To it, I'll attach some half pins, and then 4 clear inkwells for a nice headlight design. After, let's add 4 more pins and connect this into the torso. Then, we can repeat things with some brake lights, which are very important in my made-up tree mech universe. Here, I'll add a connector in order to attach this in with a single pin. I have this really weird Bionicle part, which will give us some more greebly details on the underside of the torso. For structure, I'll add some pins and a lift arm, before a hexagon can cap off the back. Next, let's attach the two halves together. Then we can add in the neck joint. I really want to showcase that this tree is taking over the mech, so let's add in some root details. We can replace the headlight with this twig. Then I'll add in a brown whip part. Thirdly, we can add some brown dino tails to represent larger roots. Next up, let's add one more whip part. I need to add another pin, but can't quite reach it, so my trusty pliers can come to the rescue. We can attach in the other end of the whip to complete the root details on the torso. With those root details in place, I really want to continue them down the right leg of our mech. The first thing we can do is replace this large tube. Let's substitute a smaller hose, and then add a brown dino tail, bursting forth from it. Let's connect that back in place. I'll connect a brown robot arm, and continue the roots down with this twig part. A dino tail can then pop out from the side, and of course, we need some whip parts for more root details. One final touch on the lower leg is a chocolate frog. On the upper leg, I'll attach a candlestick and a dino tail. Then, we can clip in one last whip part, and add a few more root details on the backside for good measure. One thing I've been thinking is that our tree needs some way to refill the water tank it's carrying around. So let's build up a water pump as an arm. We can start with a Star Wars gun, which we can add a piston body to. Then, a lightsaber rod and a pair of rod ends can round out the water nozzle. For the upper arms, let's use this snap part. Only problem here is that there's no friction in the elbow joint. We can solve that by adding a piston of our own. I'll attach in this minifigure backpack part, which we can add a half pin, bar, and rod end to. Then, I'll secure the rod end with another bar. Now with that installed, we have enough friction to hold the elbow in place. For the shoulder, I'll add some more snap, and then we can tile it off with a hexagon. For the shoulder joint itself, I'll add in a ball joint. We can also attach 2 rubber doodahs to round out the arm. The only thing missing is a hose to pump water to the tank with. Here, I'll use a pneumatic hose which we can attach a tap to. The other end can attach into the backside of the piston body. One final detail I want to add is a bird to be perched in the branches of our tree. For that, I'll build up a snot brick with a number of clips. Then a slope for the chest, followed by a few more clips. I want it to be a turkey vulture, so for the head, I'll use a couple of red parts. Now you didn't think I'd forget to use a burnt hot dog in this build, did you? We'll use it here to attach the head. Finally, I'll add the only black wing part I could find, and we'll make sure to only show one side in any pictures. And with that, we can move on to the final assembly. First, let's attach the missile pod. Then the water tank, and the pump arm. We'll follow it up with the torso. Then, let's connect in the legs. Finally, we can attach in the pilot and his little friend. And with that, it's time for the beauty shots. Thanks to all the amazing people supporting me over on Patreon. And special shout out to my newest patron, Super Duper Boy. You're the building blocks that make this channel possible. If you like this video, YouTube thinks you'll enjoy this one too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. But until then, happy building.